Hello there. Welcome to the 6th round retro, where the date is April 9th, 2005. The event, the Ultimate Fighter Season 1 finale. This went down at the Cox Pavilion in Las Vegas, Nevada. And this was basically the event that put MMA on the mainstream map, or at least the UFC on the mainstream map. Of course, joining me is none other than combat sports journalist and bloody elbow writer, Fraser Coffeen. Fraser, how are you?
I'm good, Eddie. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. It's been a while since we were able to do this with all the events and holidays going on, but it's finally nice to get back into the swing of things. And ironically, there is a tough season 26 finale going on this Friday night. So kind
I
of
wouldn't
a
know, but it works out perfectly.
little serendipitous, if you will.
Yeah.
So yeah, this was a super relevant card. It was the UFC's first ever live broadcast on a non-pay-per-view event. Um, like I said, it really put MMA on the map. So like before this event, nobody knew what the UFC was, let alone MMA. Like you ask a random person on the street, and they're not going to know what you were talking about. Forrest Griffin versus Stephan Bonnar became such an iconic fight. Um, and quite frankly, one of the greatest fights of all time. Like one of the greatest fights I have ever seen. So, I mean, it was one of those where you had casual fans calling up their buddies saying, "Hey, you have to tune in to Spike TV. These guys are just beating the hell out of each other. Like you have to turn the TV on." And it did so well. So and after that, the world was hip to the UFC.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, it feels like over the years there's been this like mythology built up around this show and this fight. And I was interested to revisit it to see, how much of that kind of holds up. But that idea that like it's the one that put everything on the map, it's really true. I mean, I like the type of fan that they were trying to get here was the fan who had been into the UFC maybe back in the day, had rented those old tapes from Blockbuster and then had kind of fallen off when they went through their dark days where it was really hard to follow the sport. And this show was the whole point of this show was let's get those guys back. Like, let's get those folks and some new folks back to understanding what UFC is about. And it really worked. And for me personally, I love revisiting this show because that's me. Like, I am the exact fan that they wanted. Like, I watched it on Blockbuster years before. I stopped watching it when it was really hard. And then I got intrigued by this reality show. I watched some. I watched this live, and it was like, oh, this is amazing. I have to watch this all the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the reality show was such an awesome move by Zuffa. I mean, because it really let you get to know the fighters and gave you a chance to care about the fighters. And that's important. Like you have to have that if you're building a single person sport, right? Like you have to give the fans a reason to cheer. If they can't cheer for a team, you have to give them a reason to cheer for individuals. So that's what the show did. It allowed personalities to shine through and ultimately became a pretty legit platform as a way to get into the UFC. So I mean, it was the first of many things. I mean, it really paved the way for so many other fighters. Like I said, we're on season 26. We had tough Latin America, tough Brazil, tough China. So it really was the just the foundation for what MMA was going to become, or at least what the UFC was going to become.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you look back on it and you see how many people did come through it. I mean, you look at this who's on this card right here. Incredible. It's people who have long histories with the UFC. You got Diego Sanchez is on here who's still fighting. You got Kenny Florian who's obviously still a major part of the UFC. You've got just these folks who have just become such a part of it. And one of the things that I thought was really cool in revisiting this too is you've got those fighters revealed here, but the show also was a platform to kind of introduce us to the whole world of it. This was where we first really met Dana White for real. this, even on this show, I thought it was interesting. Greg Jackson is in Diego Sanchez's corner. So there's Greg Jackson. There's all these figures who now for us are these major forces in MMA. And they're all here in this very like early stage. It's really neat to see.
Yeah, it's definitely awesome. And the craziest part for me is seeing everybody so young. Like everyone just so baby faced out there. It's like, who are these people?
Yeah.
Like, you don't look like Chris Lieben, you know? Like when I think of Lieben, I don't think of the baby face guy with the red hair coming to maul people, you know?
No,
so
Joe Rogan, hair. Dana White, hair. It's crazy. It's a whole different.
And they talk so much differently. Even like Bruce Buffer, he's out there still trying to find himself on the microphone. Like in Mike Goldberg commentating and even Rogan commentating. Like they don't sound like they do today. They're definitely not as polished. And another thing, at that time, there was a boxing show called The Contender that was doing something very similar. They took a bunch of top boxers and they put them in a house together and kind of allowed you to follow along. But I don't think that show really it didn't grab the audience the way that The Ultimate Fighter did. The Ultimate Fighter was new. Like no one, a lot of people didn't even know that you could legally compete in a street fight. That's basically what people were saying. They were like, "Oh, look at these people like street fighting," and that's kind of what Stephan Bonnar and Forrest Griffin was a glorified street fight. I mean, it was a technical ass street fight, and I loved it. It was so much fun.
Yeah, it's really true, and you're right. Like it is this interesting hybrid between the sort of street fight. Like the last time we were together, we talked about the very first UFC, which is really. That's really raw, but here you've moved past that, but you haven't moved sort of all the way past it. So you're still dealing with some of that kind of raw, visceral thing. Like you said, it's just not quite as polished as it is today. And that's okay. My favorite sort of piece of the polish not quite being there that I loved in watching it was, I can't remember which fight it was, but one of them, the tail of the tape pops up and Goldie's going through the tail of the tape and, identifies one thing that's different and then says everything else. And you get all excited for it. And he says, is almost exactly the same. I was like, what is this? Where's the line?
Where's the virtually identical? Where?
No, he hadn't come up with it yet. Everything else is almost exactly the same. It doesn't have the same ring to it.
I'll tell you what, though, you definitely get an appreciation of where Rogan and Buffer and Goldberg have come, in their career. They really honed their craft and perfected it, and it's such a thankless job. It's like they never get credit for being good announcers or good ring announcers, commentators. It's always, if they do a good job, it goes unnoticed. So, but when they mess up, it's like, oh, so like going back and seeing them make the flubs, making the mistakes, it's nice to see, even what they do is an art form.
Yeah, I totally agree. They are developing here. You're right. The first time I really fully realized that was the first time I saw a UFC show live and in person myself, where Buffer is a revelation live, that just how much energy that man has with everything. And you're right. It is kind of a thankless job, but he's honing his craft here, and it's cool to see.
All right, so let's get to the main card. So the main event for the Ultimate Fighter Season 1 finale, what was such an afterthought. It really was. After Forrest Griffin, Stephan Bonnar went at it, I mean, anything after that was pretty much a moot point. However, Rich Franklin did fight Ken Shamrock. He TKO'd him in 2 minutes and 42 seconds into the first round. Insanely ugly fight for Ken Shamrock, but a very Ken Shamrock fight. He came out, he slipped a bunch. He went for an ill-advised leg lock, ended up getting pounded out. Womp womp.
Yeah, falls down on his own volition. Not once, but twice. Just falls to the mat. It was very Ken Shamrock. And again, like I said, I was one of those guys. I knew Ken Shamrock. I went in and I had never heard of this Rich Franklin character. No idea who this guy was. I was, however, not foolish enough to buy on that, like, Shamrock's back, baby. He's gonna dominate. This is the best version of Ken Shamrock that's ever been around. No. It clearly it was not. We all knew, and this was an inevitable result, and it's what the result was supposed to be. The whole point of that fight was to sacrifice a name that the old fans would know in the name of building up somebody new. So it went according to plan.
It went as scripted, is what you're saying?
I didn't say it's scripted. I didn't say that, but I sort of had hoped that it probably would go. I can imagine that's probably the outcome that made the most sense.
Yeah, so Franklin got a huge push. He went and captured 2 more knockouts, I think, and then ended up winning the middleweight title from the late Evan Tanner. So, you know, Franklin, that was kind of the beginning of his rise to glory, so to speak. Even though Anderson Silva came up and ended that rather abruptly, we'll say.
It's true. You know, it's interesting. I mean, they clearly put Franklin in a very, very lucrative position right here. And I like Rich Franklin. I'm a fan of Rich Franklin. I don't feel like he's a guy that I have like this strong, like visceral connection with. And I don't know a ton of people who do. Like, it's interesting. You know, this was a really good spot and they did really push him hard. And obviously he did very well. He's a world champion. I don't know that he's sort of ever was kind of the flagship guy that I think they were hoping that by putting him in this spot, I think they were hoping for him to be.
Yeah, I mean, he really tried the nice guy approach because he was. I mean, he was a school teacher. Like, he was a legit stand-up guy. And, you know, that kind of lacked a little bit of flair and didn't really generate the kind of buzz maybe that UFC was hoping for. But, I mean, once Anderson Silva came into the picture, that problem was no more. I mean,
yes, it's true. That's very true.
All right, so, yeah, what's that?
I certainly didn't help his cause to become a big name. Yeah.
No. All right, so the co-main event, the finale for the light heavyweight Ultimate Fighter season. Wow. Forrest Griffin, Stephan Bonnar literally put on one of the greatest fights I have ever seen in my life. Like, to this day, like, we've had some wars since then. Like, you know, Doo Ho Choi, Cub Swanson. We had Dan Henderson versus Shogun, Mark Hunt versus Bigfoot One. Like, we've seen some wars, and this one is every bit as good as those. And oh man, it was such a display. Like, both guys putting everything on the line, never quitting, being visibly dead tired, and pushing through, and just giving everything they had. And it was an emotional moment. Like, it moves me. Like, even to this day, I look back and watch it, and I get overwhelmed with just this awesome feeling of just, man, like, anyone who's ever been dead tired and like wanted to quit on themselves but didn't understand what those men were going through. And it was really special. It was really special.
Yeah, I know what you mean about that exhaustion. And there's a number of shots of Bonnar in particular where he's just got his hands up and he's just got this dead look on his face, but he is just not going to stop, and he just kind of keeps coming forward and keeps coming, and you're like, well, clearly, you know, he can't possibly go on, and he does. And it, like, and I mean, Forrest does that as well. I don't mean to just focus on Bonnar, but like, you just see it more from him. It really is amazing. I was curious. It's been years since I watched this fight. I was curious to rewatch it and see if it held up or if it was sort of sloppy and like we've seen these other great brawls and, you know, they're better. I think it totally held up. And it's because of that emotional piece. There's more technical fights. Yeah, there's probably brawls that had more action in it. But the pure, raw emotion from both of them, from Forrest in particular, because he's a very emotional guy, always was. That's what made him such a great fighter and such an awesome fighter to watch. But it really was amazing. I'm throwing down, I'm saying it, best UFC fight of all time. That's right. I said it. I'm sticking with it.
It's really hard to disagree with that. And I think it's fair to put it in the top 10 without question, arguably top 5 for sure. Man, what a crazy just display of heart, and so much was riding on the line. Like, you followed these guys' lives, fighting on the show, and showing their personalities and picking who you liked, and everyone had a dog in that race going in. Well, at least anyone who was following the show. I mean, I was Team Forrest, going in, and mid-fight that completely went away, and I am rooting for both guys. And it was such a special moment. So Forrest went on to win the unanimous decision. How they scored that fight, I couldn't tell you. watching it again, like if you just watch it, it's virtually impossible to keep track of any kind of punch count or anything like that. Like
Yeah.
if you can keep track of the strikes, then you're not watching the fight. You know, it's that good. And man, what a war! Like what a war! And I don't know how they could call a winner. And when they finally announced Forrest Griffin was the winner, Forrest looked shocked. Bonner collapsed to the canvas. Like it was such a moment. You felt it from either guy. Like, I mean, it crushed me a little bit when I saw Bonner, like, just disappointment came over his face and he just melted down to the mat. And I felt bad for the dude. Like, dude, you just laid it all on the line and you getting nothing.
Yeah.
But Dana White had a moment of clarity and a genius move, a move of compassion. He opted to award Bonner the 6-figure contract as well. And I thought that was awesome. I can't think of a recent moment like that where the UFC went above and beyond to do what is the right thing or what would be deemed the right thing. So super, super special moment. Great moment for the UFC. Emotional moment for the fans. Emotional moment for everyone involved. I mean, what more can you say about this fight?
Yeah, it is such a great moment that he gives them both, and it leads to that iconic shot of after it's been announced of the two of them like with their hands held, raising each other's hands, and just sort of looking at each other, and it's just this great moment of like, man, like these two have just been through something together in this huge way, and they were sort of forever linked because of that. You know, I mean, the two of them, you know, they were kind of like a buddy comedy series for a while on UFC, doing all kinds of different stuff because people just wanted to see more of them. And they rematched and it was good, but obviously couldn't live up to the hype of the first one. But it was still a good fight. And yeah, it did. It just had all of that. I think one of the things that's really amazing, I was thinking about this in watching this fight. I think one of the amazing sort of tricks of this first season of The Ultimate Fighter is the fact that they are fighting for a UFC contract and they're putting it all out there for a UFC contract. And if you think about it, that's actually the most genius piece of marketing of this whole thing is that it's showing you, the fan, that like if you're an MMA fighter, the only thing that you want is to be in the UFC. This is what matters. It's just this great way of being like, see this fight? This is how much being in the UFC matters to these people. That's why we have the best fighters on the planet. That's why you have to watch us. That's why forget Pride, forget all those other guys. It's all about, you know, this, because just by the sheer nature of having them fight for this contract, it elevates the status of that contract to this huge level. It's a really shrewd and very savvy marketing move.
Definitely ingenious. And
Yeah.
what's a little on the sad side is, you know, oh, 6-figure contract. But when you actually go back and look at it, Bonner was getting 12 to show and 12 to win. Yeah, according to Tapology, he was getting 12 to show, 12 to win for his first 3 official UFC fights, and then renegotiated. So I mean, 6 figures contract sounds great, but he was really only getting 12 and 12 to for each fight, which doesn't sound quite as cool. You know, oh, you know, win a 12 and 12 contract. It doesn't have quite the same ring to it.
It does not. It does not. And, you know, and Bonner, unfortunately, I feel like clearly Forrest was he was the better choice in the long run to win because he's the one who went on to become a world champion, went on to have, Hall of Fame career in his own right. Bonner, this is sort of Bonner's going to be remembered for this, and Forrest will be remembered for this and other stuff. But this is kind of the real clear high water mark in the Bonner career. Not that he did poorly after this; he did fine, but he never really elevated to that super high level that Forrest did.
Yeah, I feel like they were both kind of on the same level, but I think Forrest was just an overachiever.
Yeah.
It's like it was like he almost didn't know what he didn't know, and ignorance was bliss, because his just sheer will to win, carried him through a lot of his fights. Like just his grit and his moxie of never giving up. And You know, that was awesome. But like the great equalizer for me was they both fought Anderson Silva, and they both got absolutely embarrassed by Anderson Silva.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
to kind of put the world into perspective in terms of all-time greats, like yes, these guys were exceptionally special to the UFC Hall of Famers, but let's not, you know.
yeah. Yes, yes, it's very true. They both got completely mauled, which was rough. But Forrest, I will always go to bat for Forrest for the fact that he has back-to-back wins over Shogun and Rampage. That is nothing to shake a stick at. That is a rock solid point in his career. And then it all kind of goes to pot after that, but that's okay.
Yeah,
Those two really good ones.
he won the belt. Like
Yeah.
you can't take that away from him. And he's still employed with the UFC. I believe he's working at the new nutrition center or the sports center or whatever that new UFC complex is called. I know he's got a gig over there. So, you know, that's cool. I like seeing that. I think Stephan Bonnar, didn't he like go over to Bellator or something?
Yeah, he had that amazing fight with Tito Ortiz where he unmasked the dude with like the pro wrestling like unmasked Tito's long lost training partner. It was terrible. It was a disaster.
Yeah, that was really bad.
Real bad. So that's what Bonner was up to last time we saw him.
Yeah, you heard anything about him lately? I don't think I have.
No, has he fought since that Tito Ortiz fight in Bellator?
Mm-mm. Nope,
Yeah,
that was it. Well, good on him if that was the last we're going to see of him.
yeah.
I think we should also note uh, another little weird idiosyncrasy about this odd couple. Both of their last fights were Tito Ortiz,
Mm, yeah.
except Forrest went on and won his. So kind of weird that they came into the UFC together and went out fighting the same guy. I think that's a little, that's kind of odd, right?
It is a little weird. And Forrest, of course, has a great history with Tito Ortiz. That first Forrest Griffin Tito Ortiz fight is another personal favorite of mine. It's great. And I think the thing that makes that like so much of the Tito and Forrest fights and so much of Forrest's career so great is like we already talked about. It's that emotion, it's that overachieving. And I think when people talk nowadays about sort of what sometimes there's feels like is missing from the UFC of 2017, it's Forrest Griffin. It's that type of guy who just has like so much emotion pouring out of him in every fight. We don't see as much of that. We see more polished, better fighters, but sometimes sometimes you miss that.
Yeah, I think the closest thing we have is probably Conor McGregor. I hate to say it,
Yeah.
but he is probably one of the more passionate, or one of the guys who wears his emotion on the sleeve, win or lose.
Mhm.
But speaking of the consummate overachiever, Kenny Florian made it to the finale for the middleweight Ultimate Fighter. Like, are you kidding me? This guy, he fought at 145 when he finally got into the UFC, and that was a thing. But he fought at 185. Like, that is just impressive. Now, he got the shit kicked out of him by Diego Sanchez. Like, he didn't have a single moment in this fight. In fact, Diego, he stomped a mud hole in him in 2 minutes and 49 seconds of the opening round. It was a Diego takedown, Diego full mount, Diego ground and pound, Diego wins.
Yeah, yeah. Florian did not seem like a guy who was going to amount to a whole lot after this, and yet obviously he went on to have a great career in his own right. You gotta appreciate. Yeah, he overachieved in a big way, and there's he didn't have a whole lot to walk away showing from this particular fight. But Diego, looked very good. He was clearly groomed to be kind of, a big name out of this. I thought it was interesting how in the intro, Kenny Florian just makes his way to the cage, and then Diego's got a live band in the ring playing him out. You're like, okay, all right, I get where the promotional muscle is going for this one, and justifiably so, since Diego dominated that fight.
Yeah, and it's crazy because Diego Sanchez went on to have a pretty lengthy, still ongoing career at lightweight. So he chopped down 2 weight classes. Like, it's weird to see him all, thick looking, and then see Kenny looking just not athletic whatsoever. Like his cut to 145 was when he started looking like a fighter. When he was at 185, I mean, he looked like, you know, the dude across the street. Like he just. But I will say this. So this fight here, Sanchez and Florian, this was probably one of Steve Mazzagati's better stoppages. Like he was right on top of the action. Like he gets a lot of crap for being a terrible referee, but that was one of his better stoppages. So I think we should definitely point that out.
That's valid. I'll give you that. A great story I once heard about Kenny Florian in this fight that I think is, well, not this fight, but in The Ultimate Fighter in general, that's great, is that the fight that got him into the show basically was a fight that he lost, that Dana White went because he was interested in Fickett, and so was hoping to get Fickett on Tough.
Drew Fickett. But
Florian, it was Florian versus Fickett. Dana White's there scouting Fickett. Fickett wins, but Dana White says, no, it's that other guy. That other guy's the guy. That so pulled him into the show, which I think is cool.
Wow, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
And I think Kenny Florian won over a lot of fans by simply being the small, nerdy guy who was, you know, he had the technique. So he definitely was outgunned in every fight, but he leaned on his technique to find ways to win. And that was very reminiscent of the early UFCs. And who doesn't love an underdog? And Kenny Florian was that. And when he cut down to 145, holy shit, it was a problem. Like his Muay Thai got really sharp. His submissions were phenomenal. And he ended up competing for the belt. He fought BJ Penn. Didn't go his way, but, BJ Penn was tough back in 2009.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, Florian was a mental fighter. He played he won fights with his mind a lot, and just by knowing, just thinking it through and thinking what to do in there. And you're right, that's cool. It's a different kind of thing, and I think it's really neat. He served a real purpose, I think, on this show of kind of giving that, like, he was the one, I think, of the four people in the finals. He was the one who most sort of, as the person sitting at home watching, made you feel like, oh, like I can do that. I can train and get in there and do that if this kid can do it. Which was really cool. It was a neat aspect.
Yeah, and he was a finisher too. Florian was a finisher.
Yeah.
That dude was dangerous. That is one of the most unassuming, dangerous men you will ever see.
Yeah, he was good. And I feel bad. I feel like we're underselling poor Diego here a little bit. But it's kind of just because he did what was expected of him, and he had a really good run for a while there. It wasn't until he ran into Koscheck and Koscheck handed him his first loss that we started to see kind of things not turning out quite as well for him. But even after that, he still went on to get his own title shot with BJ Penn, where he got bloodied up to destroyed.
Yeah.
It was nasty.
That was one of the worst cuts I've ever seen. BJ kicked him right in the head. Oh man, that was bad. That was definitely bad. And yeah, man, Diego he was tough. Like that was like you said about force and emotion. Yeah. No one had more emotion than Diego Sanchez. Like this dude was just the weirdest ball of emotion you'll ever see, and he was just so down to fight that gave him a leg up in each of his bouts, pretty much, because he was just more about that life, so to speak.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, he made his fights really, really entertaining for a long time, and I think you're right. He remains the guy who's still just down to fight, and that's why he's still there, and that's why it's also gets to be a little hairy watching him fight these days, because he's never changed his style. He's never decided that he's not going to be the just push it forward and just go all out and attack. But as you get older, and your defense goes down and your chin goes down, it's probably better to do something a little bit different. But that's not what he's going to do, and so he's going to get elbowed by Matt Brown into unconsciousness. So.
Yeah, that was definitely tough to watch.
Yeah.
But what a full career from both of those guys, really. They definitely left their mark on the sport. I think that's fair to say.
Absolutely.
Well, two guys who did not leave their mark on the sport, Sam Hogar and Bobby Southworth. This was probably the lamest fight on the card. It was still a pretty competitive bout, but there were no gigantic moments, no definitive moments, not a lot of drama in the fight. Even though these guys had a lot of bad blood going in from the show, it just kind of turned into kind of this sticky striking bout where like neither guy really went all out. They were like almost afraid to make a big mistake. So it was kind of just a real sticky fight. I you know, it's I'm sure in a different light it would be a much better fight for me, but sandwiched in with all these first round knockouts and Forrest and Stephan Bonnar, it's like, man, get this fight out of here.
Yeah, I made the poor strategic decision to watch this shortly after Griffin and Bonnar, and so it really stunk in my eyes. As Harris pointed to that was a bad choice. Yeah, I mean, it's not terrible. It's just not. Like you said, there's nothing really memorable, nothing particularly interesting in it. They did have a lot of bad blood. Southworth was kind of a bit of a bully on the show. Hogar was very unpopular with the rest of the guys in the house. And so there was this. Well then, are you still there?
Yep.
Trouble. And so there was this sort of reality TV drama to it, but you're right, it didn't materialize into anything of real note. Hogar takes the win. Southworth that's his lone UFC appearance, though he went on to have a little bit of a career in Strikeforce, and inexplicitly has, for unknown reasons, got choked out by Vitor Belfort in Pride once. And Hogar had, he had a little bit of a run in the UFC. So he did decently for himself.
Yeah, he didn't do well. He did pretty bad, but he lost 2 of what is that? 2 of 6, maybe.
It's worse than I remember as I look at it now. It's not as. But okay, he did not have a good run, but he fought some guys.
Yes, he fought some world champions.
I mean, he fought some dudes, no doubt about it.
Yeah, he was always tough. Like, he didn't look like much, but he just seemed like a really tough guy, like really hard to put away.
Yeah.
But enough of that fight. Let's get on to something more exciting, like Chris Leben destroying Jason Thacker in 1 minute and 35 seconds. Not really what you think of when you think of Chris Leben. You don't think of the wrestler coming and taking you down and unleashing ground and pound. Like, you think of like, you hurt him until he gets upset with you hurting him, and then he comes and puts you away. Like, that's what I think of when I think of Chris Leben. So this was a little jarring to see Leben win in that fashion. And this also had bad blood. I think Leben urinated on Thacker's bed on the show, and I don't think Thacker ever forgave him. So there was some animosity going into this. But what did you think of this short fight?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's not your typical Leben fight. It's a bit of a reminder that, like, this guy came up through Team Quest. So, like, this is the Leben who got trained by, Randy Couture and Dan Henderson. Like, that's not normally how he does things. You're right. He's normally to just swing it and swing it and swing it until you knock somebody out. Here, it's dare I say it, it's a smart fight from Chris Leben here.
Yeah.
Takes him down, moves him to the cage, grounds and pounds, straightforward, bada bing, and kind of does what he needs to do. He was obviously a very, very colorful character on the show. Probably one of the big names of the season. Came here and did exactly what he had to do to sort of keep that name going and keep his UFC career, get his UFC career off to a cool start.
Yeah, and a cool start it was. I mean, the dude 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He racked up 5 straight wins, with that being the first, before running into Anderson Silva.
Yeah,
that's kind of the theme of the night. Is these guys are doing well, and then they run into Anderson Silva.
So he's definitely the 4th person who has been slaughtered by Anderson that we've talked about here. Yeah, and it's funny. I distinctly remember when that fight happened, because that's Silva's UFC debut. Silva had done fine in Pride, but not as well as he would go on to do at the UFC. And I remember at the time reading online some people being like, "Oh, if Leben plays this smart, he can win this. This is a winnable fight for Chris Leben." It was not a winnable fight for Chris Leben at all.
Not even close. But I mean, you can understand why people would say that. 5 straight wins, knocking people out. Beating some pretty tough guys like Jorge Rivera, Luigi Fioravante. So even Patrick Cote.
Yeah.
Leben, he had some hype behind him, but after that fight, there was no more hype to be had for Chris Leben. Like, none. He was done with hype at that point.
So, his opponent here, Jason Thacker, not much to say about Thacker. He did not, did not have much of a career. The only thing really, of note about him is that if you have never done it, you really need to do yourself a favor and go check out the article In Search of Strange Brew by Chuck Mindenhall, which came out, I think, 2 years ago. Great piece where he goes and tracks down Jason Thacker. It's long, but it is super fantastic. In Search of Strange Brew. If you've never read it, you got to do that after this is done.
Okay, interesting. I'll have to go check that out for sure. Okay, so next on the bout, we had Josh Koscheck's first official UFC fight. He defeated Chris Sanford by a brutal ground and pound knockout at 4:21 of the opening round. Woo! This was a scary fight. This was scary for me. Like I saw this and was like, man, Koscheck is scary. Like, this dude is so athletic. And this was when we were seeing like these NCAA All-Americans come into the sport where they're just so hyper athletic and so great in a discipline of controlling the other guy. And they were starting to pick up other skills super fast, like the striking. Like, it was just an interesting time in the sport. And man, Koscheck was for real. Like, this dude was for real. Like, he got clipped early, and but I mean, his double legs were just not going to be fucked with. Excuse my language, but you weren't stopping his double leg. You're not stopping his slams. And man, he gets on top and he's in side control, and he holds him down with one hand and just starts punching him with the other, and the dude went unconscious. I mean, it was a crazy, crazy debut.
Yeah, it was brutal. This is aside from Griffin Bonner, obviously, this is my favorite fight of the night. I really enjoyed this. Yeah, Koscheck's got those two insane double legs that he lifts. They're just nasty. He's got the ground and pound that is brutal, but at the same time, Sanford surprisingly held his own. He caught him with a hook in the beginning that did stagger Koscheck and had some success there. He goes for a leg lock when which is always exciting to see, and seems like he actually does kind of come close to winning with it. I didn't expect much out of Sanford. I don't know that I've ever seen this fight before, but I didn't expect a whole lot of Sanford out of this, and he looked good. This was a fun fight. But yeah, Koscheck was a machine here. He was just a total beast.
And Sanford was such like a bowling ball, and the way Koscheck lifted him up and slammed him was just so elegant and just graceful. And oh man, it really gave me hopes for Koscheck. And Koscheck, I mean, he went on to be a bad mofo. Like, he went on a crazy tear, like hurting people. Like, he started learning that he can hurt people with his hands, and he was knocking people out on the feet and kicking guys in the head. And it was I was a Koscheck fan. Like, he would run his mouth also, but he was just never the same after that first GSP fight.
No, GSP Anderson Silva'd him here, and wrecked him and changed his career trajectory entirely. But you're right. I mean, he's a dude who could hurt people. I mean, he, like you said, he knocks Sanford out cold with a ground and pound shot, which you don't see all that often. Somebody just going out like that. Yeah, I mean, there's a reason it's listed as a KO, not a TKO.
Yeah. What's crazy is Koscheck owns a submission win over Anthony Rumble Johnson.
Yeah.
How crazy is that? That's crazy for many reasons. One, because that's the outcome. Two, Anthony Johnson fighting at 170. That's in and of itself is an anomaly. But that was a crazy run. He knocked out Frank Trigg, choked out Anthony Johnson, and then beat Paul Daly in that decision that had the controversial ending there with Daly sucker punching him after the bell. But
yeah, he had some great stuff. He had that, I remember he had that just brutal KO of Yoshida where he knocked him out, and then knocked him out again before he fell down. It was nastiness.
Yeah, the cage stopped Yoshida from falling, and Koscheck was like, "Word, overhand right again on a standing up unconscious guy."
Yeah,
brutal, definitely brutal. A bit of a sad note. 4 or 5. Koscheck has lost 6 straight fights, 5 of them by finish, and the last of which by a guy that no one knows, some 12-7 dude in Bellator recently. And that was really sad to watch. It really was. So perhaps he's done. I mean, I don't want to see Koscheck take any more damage. And going back and watching the Ultimate Fighter season 1 finale even furthers that point. Because this was a guy that I rooted for at one point, and it just sucks to see people you become a fan of basically just get beat up. Like
Yeah.
that's tough. But he was in his prime that night. Maybe not in his prime, but he was coming into his own.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting what you said there because he didn't have his striking game really developed yet at this point. He's a tremendous wrestler. He's sort of a Mark Kerr-ish guy here, where it's all wrestling, not a tremendous amount of striking, and yet you can see that obviously there's something to build on because he's got that raw power that is enough to build a striking game. And as over the course of a few more fights, he built that striking game. That's when he did become legitimate title contender.
Yeah, interesting career for sure.
Yep.
It's almost kind of like that Kenny Florian situation where he got to the top, but just couldn't quite conquer.
Yeah.
Okay, so before that entertaining fight, we had Nate "The Rock" Corey defeat Logan Sincade by a standing TKO at 3 minutes and 17 seconds of the first round. And this was basically Nate Corey having some target practice. I mean, completely outclassed Sincade here. Beautiful combinations with his hands, with his kicks, body punches, leg kicks, body kicks. I mean, it was basically it almost looked like a focus mitt session for Nate Corey. I mean, it was completely lopsided, but it was so masterful and like technical and very methodical. I thought it was a brilliant performance.
It was cool. It was really cool. It was you're right. He countered, he was patient, he picked his shots very carefully. It was kind of funky. It was like his boxing style was weird. He had, he did not have the hands close. They were, far out to the side, just kind of bloop, bloop, and just kind of blop to these little shots on him. It was a weird style, but very effective, and just sort of let Sincade kind of come at him. And then every time he did, he just landed on him and sort of, in that kind of Max Holloway style, he kind of just, turned up the heat a little bit and turned up the heat a little bit and turned up the heat a little bit until he just cooked him. And that was that. It was good stuff. Big win for Nate Corey too. He's super emotional at the end. He's crying, and it's such a big thing because he of course didn't actually get to compete on the show. He suffered an injury during the show, so did not get to compete, and was thought of as one of the favorites. It's interesting to think about what might have happened if he had not been injured. Would we have seen a Nate Corey Diego Sanchez final instead of Kenny Florian? Seems that probably would be my guess of how it would have played out had Corey not been injured. But you can tell he's got a lot of pent up feeling from having had his tough experience cut short.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Now that I think about it, that's one fight we never got was Nate Corey and Diego Sanchez. Like
yeah,
that would have been cool before Diego dropped down.
It feels like they should have done that in the same way that they did Michael Bisping and Matt Hamill. Because same thing happened to Hamill, and they kind of did that to be like, let's just make sure that we know that Bisping's the real champ. It feels like Diego and Corey would have been a cool fight to have happened.
But Corey, yeah, I mean, he did his own thing. He went on to score two other knockouts. He knocked out Pete Sell, who was Matt Serra's protege, and then he picked up a. Oh no, yeah. So he knocked out Pete Sell. He knocked out Shoney Carter. That earned him a fight with Rich Franklin, in which he, I hate to say it, he got posterized. It was one of the most brutal knockouts I have ever seen. So Corey, he's fighting Franklin. He thinks he's doing well. He's out there doing his thing. And then holy moly, Franklin lands this left hand from hell that, I mean, it like instantly broke the nose of Nate Corey, on top of sending him unconscious while he's still on his feet. I mean, like instant one punch KO, like good doing, and like falling timber. Like it was a knockout for the ages, and he was on the wrong end of that.
Yeah, Corey was not ready for that Rich Franklin. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. That was a level up, and it was rough. But good. Like, as is sort of the common theme here tonight. Good career for Nate Corey. He did well nonetheless.
Yeah, I think my favorite Nate Quarry moment was when he fought Caleb Starnes at
Oh,
UFC 83. That was in Canada. And Starnes is like running from him the whole time. So Corey, he goes like this, and he's chasing Starnes around the ring like that. And it was seriously one of the funniest MMA moments I can ever think of. And it was it was just spectacular. So, Corey, he one of the unsung heroes of MMA, a quiet yet meaningful career inside of the UFC.
yeah, I agree. And I think the ultimate legacy of Nate Quarry could still be determined because he's heavily involved in a lot of fighters' rights things with the UFC, and depending on how those things go, uh, we might ultimately be remembering years from now Nate Quarry for that more than anything else. We'll see.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. As far as Loden Kincaid goes, that was his first and only UFC fight, and he went on to have a mixed batch of wins and losses and random regional organizations. So not
Yeah,
too much, not too much by the way of Kincaid.
won the WEC light heavyweight title.
Oh, did he?
Something he was one of the later champs. He held the belt until Doug Rhino Marshall beat him for it. So he did something.
Oh, wow. Okay,
Yeah,
so he did.
good
It's
on him.
crazy to think of him as a light heavyweight, though.
I don't know how that worked, but whatever.
I thought he was a small 185er when he fought Corey. So I
Uh,
have to go back and watch that because that weirds me out, to be quite honest.
I'm with you.
Okay, so before that we had Mike Swick defeat Alex Schonauer by brutal, insane, quick, swift knockout. 20 seconds into the first round, I mean, Swick came out and absolutely stormed the castle of Schonauer. I mean, he threw like a 20-piece punching combo reminiscent of Vitor Belfort and Vanderlei Silva back in the day. I mean, this was beautiful. Like Schonauer like went to sleep on the feet and like just kind of slumped over unconscious. I mean, it was a brutal display of violence. Like it was intense.
Yeah, Vitor and Wanderlei is the exact fight I was thinking of as well. Swick was very smart here. He did not go strategic. He did not go defense. He said, you know what? I got this platform. I am going to make sure that people remember my fight. And they did. 20-second KO. Storms takes the guy out, and then interestingly follows that up in his next fight with a 22-second KO, which is what earns him the nickname of Mike Quick Swick, which lingered on for the rest of his career. Yeah, very very impressive performance there.
Yeah, I think going into this fight, he was known as the Young Lion, which is
Yeah,
terrible and
no good, no good.
horrible. But
Quick, Mike Quick.
Mike Quick Swick was definitely awesome. Yeah, he knocked out Gideon Ray in 22 seconds. Then he went and choked out someone else in 2 minutes, and then choked out Joe Riggs in 2 minutes, and then the Swickatine became a thing,
Oh yeah,
catching everyone in this guillotine. So he had a pretty awesome run there. I gotta say, he won a lot of fights in the UFC. He was dangerous. He was a finisher. He could submit people. He could stand with people. Um, and he was a bit of a crowd favorite too. He seemed to people didn't hate him.
no,
People seemed to like get behind him, and he
you know,
fought back in 2015. He came back for one fight against Alex Garcia.
yeah. I mean, he ultimately made it to one fight away from a title shot. Lost to Dan Hardy, and Hardy that went on to Hardy then facing GSP. So yet again, theme of the show, came very close, but put together a really good run. He's got a lot of wins under his belt. Nothing to be feeling bad about in that career.
Yeah, what's he? I heard he was like a coach for like AKA Thailand. Is he still out there? You heard anything from him lately?
That was the last thing that I heard, that he was doing some of that coaching kind of stuff. I think that is where he is. I don't swear by that.
Okay, I saw him post some video. I don't know when it was, but it was like a monkey had stole something from him or something, and like they had to get into a fight with a monkey. I don't know. It was a while ago, but definitely exciting. 20 seconds. I mean, how awesome is that? Poor Alex Schonauer. He
Yeah,
I liked him on the show. I enjoyed his fight with Forrest, where he was so like watching him get in the zone, I thought was a cool glimpse into his perspective and the way he just amped himself up, and he came out just looking possessed and just took it right to Forrest and busted him open, in the opening moments of the fight. Ended up getting his lunch taken, but it was still a game showing.
Yeah.
But he didn't last in the UFC. He had a little run in the IFL, but hit or miss, a lot of alternating back-to-back wins and losses.
Yep.
But cool fight, man. Cool fight. Go check it out. It takes 20 seconds to watch it. Like, go watch this fight. It's beautiful.
It's a fun one.
Okay, so to open up the show, we had Alex Karalexis defeated Josh Rafferty by TKO at 1 minute and 40 seconds into the opening round. This fight, it was probably like the least violent of all the knockouts. It was Karalexis closed the distance. Rafferty jumped a guillotine, as like a lot of people did back in that time frame. Like people still thought that was a good idea. But he failed, and Karalexis took the top position and then just pounded him out, basically. Not much else going on there besides some good sportsmanship by Karalexis. He like kind of knew that Rafferty was out and kind of looked to the ref like, hey, this guy's out, which, that's awesome to see, especially back then where there was MMA was really violent back then, where, a lot of guys went unconscious when they probably shouldn't have, basically.
Yeah, I know what you mean. This was fine. And Karalexis is he's a heavy hitting guy, hard hands. But this was a fight that was it was sort of, it didn't have the huge violence of like Swick. It didn't have the big moments of Koscheck doing the big takedowns. I took no notes for this fight. I have very little memory of it. It's a fight. It is what it is. Karalexis, he didn't do a ton in the UFC, but went on and had an okay little run in the WEC for a bit. Did all right over there. But yeah, probably of all the winners, he probably is one of the ones that sort of accomplished the least overall. But nonetheless, gets to be the guy who wins with a good stoppage in the very first fight of the tough finale. So he's in the history books for that.
He is. Josh Rafferty, though, he really didn't do too much, and which is weird because for whatever reason, I distinctly remember Mike Goldberg mentioning Josh Rafferty like all the time, like back in the day. Like for whatever reason, I feel like he mentioned him so much for someone who fought one time officially in the UFC.
Who knows? Maybe they were buds. Who knows? Could
be. But yeah, I mean, it was a cool way to open up the show. First round knockout, kind of setting the tone for the evening. And that was the fight card. So we had 7 first round knockouts, 1 regular ass decision, and then 1 epic fight for the ages. That was Stephan Bonnar, Forrest Griffin. Of course, we have to overlook the Rich Franklin Ken Shamrock fight, even though it was the main event. It really was just a footnote of this monumental night. Like, no one really cared. And I wouldn't be surprised if people had already left their seats and weren't even sticking around to watch that one. But this was the Science days of MMA, right? Like, science fiction is what me and my buddies called it. Science was like the #1 supplement sponsored by the UFC, and who knows what happened to all that. We have USADA now. This is the USADA era, so I don't know if Science would have been up to code.
I'm not sure. It's a good question. We'll have to get some of our team on that, see if they
awesome. But overall, I mean, this was a really fantastic card. Like, where are you getting all these first round finishes on top of an awesome war with so much relevancy and so much on the line? I mean, a fantastic card, one for the ages. And I mean, it really launched the UFC into the mainstream vein where it lives now. I mean, without Stephan Bonnar and Forrest Griffin, there is no Ronda Rousey. There is no Conor McGregor. I mean, there is no Floyd Mayweather versus Conor McGregor. Like, without this right here, we could still be trying to find UFC fights at Blockbuster Video if Blockbuster was still around. But we would be bootlegging these video, it would be completely different. So, I mean, I think it's important for new fans to understand just how pivotal this fight was. I mean, I've heard Dana White say that if the Ultimate Fighter season 1 failed, then that was it. Like the Fertittas dumped a whole bunch of money into, I think maybe it was $40 million, like right before this, and then they really went all in, and the gamble paid off. And I mean, not only like MMA fans and people in it can appreciate it, but businesses, like people who don't even care about fighting, can look at the story and look what the Fertittas did and what Dana White did, and say, wow, like these guys gambled and they took educated risk, and it paid off. And they took, they bought, how much did they buy the UFC for originally? Like $2 million or something, something like that. And then they sell it for $4.2 billion. I mean, wow. Yeah. That $4.2 billion does not happen without the Ultimate Fighter season 1 finale.
And you're totally right. I mean, and that's what's amazing is that the thing that I loved about this card is that it does have that history. It does have that importance. I mean, I've been covering kickboxing for a number of years. Kickboxing is a pain in the butt to watch. It is very hard kickboxing. And I feel like, without something like this happening, the MMA, there's a very good chance MMA is in that same kind of realm where it's just, it ain't easy to find it. You can track it down, but it's not easy. So this has that historic part. But aside from that, the thing that I was impressed by going back and revisiting this is you put all of that aside, and it's just a great card. It's just a show full of great finishes and one absolutely incredible fight. It's a good show. So I'm really glad that we had a chance to revisit it, because it's got that great combination of history and just purely being awesome, just standing on its own. Good
absolutely stuff. Absolutely. Well, let me ask you this. This is the $1 million question. Now that you've watched Forrest and Stephan again, who do you think won that fight? Who did you score it for?
I tried to really think about it watching it, and I think 29-28 Forrest is the right score. I think he hurt Bonner just a little bit more in 2 out of the 3 rounds. So yeah, I approve. 29.
Okay, I'm not upset with the decision, but part of me feels like Bonner didn't get robbed. No, I would never say that. I feel like Bonner, if you like break it down and like if you want to split hairs, I would probably give it to Bonner. I mean, he busted Forrest's nose, and like that was probably the most damage that was dealt in that entire fight, was the busted nose there. And I don't remember if it was the first or the second round, but I might have edged it to Bonner maybe, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. Oh, I think we lost Fraser. I think he froze on us. Yes, he did. He did. But that's okay, because we are at the end of our show. I hope you guys enjoyed. So next time we are going to visit the year 2008. May 31st, 2008 to be exact, for Elite XC Primetime. Now, this was the first time that mixed martial arts was aired live on network television in the United States. So it was a really big deal for MMA in general. And it's kind of weird that that Elite XC beat the UFC to it, because it wasn't until UFC scored their Fox deal that they were on network television. So Elite XC really were the first to do it in that respect. So Elite XC Primetime, that's going to be our next show. And of course, the headliner was Kimbo Slice versus James Thompson, and just a crazy brawl of a slobber knocker of a war. I mean, it was it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. So make sure you tune in for that. Also, this Friday night, we have the Ultimate Fighter Season 26 finale. So be sure to check that out. Bloody Elbow will be doing all sorts of coverage for it, from all of our shows, Vivisections, Care Don't Care, the whole 9. Also, there is a UFC 218 on Saturday. Same shows for that. There is a Bellator on this Friday also. So much MMA, and there's also a Combate Americas going down this Friday. So much MMA on the horizon, so much MMA behind us that we have yet to recap. Yeah, so Fraser, if you can hear me, thank you for joining me. I know you're stuck in the ether, but I definitely appreciate your input and your perspective. Oh, and there he is. I was just saying, I just filled everyone in that we were going to watch Elite XC and comment on Kimbo versus Thompson. And I filled everyone in on all the MMA shows this weekend, from Combate to UFC 218 to the Tough 26 finale, Bellator, the whole shebang. Any parting words for us?
You're going to have to learn that I'm not the most tech-savvy person in the world, and I apologize for my phone running out of power there. My sincere apologies. But no, this was a great show. Thank you. And yeah, Elite XC Primetime, it's going to be lunacy, and great fun to watch.
What's lunacy is the fact that you were able to power up your iPhone that quickly. That, sir, is impressive. That is absolutely impressive. All right, well, so that's our show. Fraser, thank you for joining me. You can find Fraser on Twitter at FCoffeine, right?
That is it.
Beautiful. You can find me on Twitter at the Eddie Mercado. You can read both of us over at bloodyelbow.com. If you like this show, smash the like button, comment in the comments section. Tell us your favorite Ultimate Fighter Season 1 moments, your favorite fights from back then. Tell us any other future events that you would like us to cover. And there are many. There are a lot of these staple events that are kind of, lost in the weeds, so to speak. So we're going to try to drag them out of the weeds, relive them, experience them, and just take away the important moments, such as Stephan Bonnar versus Forrest Griffin 1. Like, what a crazy night. But yeah, smash the like button. Subscribe to MMANation.com, DOTCOM, and go be a good person.